I'm just going to be spending the next few minutes updating the sidebar for like the text and stuff, which we will not be using any longer. Hope everyone's having a good day. The actual character list I might need to work on a little bit longer. I didn't actually think about it over the weekend. But yeah. Let me see if there's a quick way to do any of this. We can have a color filter or an opacity. Kind of want it to look old-fashioned and old-timey for this book. Who knows if that's possible? But yes, for those of you who are not here on Saturday, we read some of the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, which is not actually the second book. So we are restarting with the actual second book of Sherlock Holmes, which is The Sign of Four, and not The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. But yeah, until someone shows up, I'm just going to be working off screen. Hello, one viewer. I'm working off screen. But yeah, we in fact read the wrong book on Saturday, so we're coming back to the actual second book of Sherlock Holmes. A Study in Scarlet was the first book. The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes is the third book, which is what we started on Saturday. Today we are going back to The Sign of Four, which is the second book of Sherlock Holmes. But yeah, I am just looking at ways to make the character sheet look a little nicer. Which just might involve me like making a Google Doc and editing there. But in the meantime, yeah, I'll start reading in about 30 seconds, I guess, because I don't think there's much more for me to do in terms of working on the character list until I actually start implementing it into the stream. But I hope you're doing well, one viewer. Okay, I guess I can get started. So, the last book concluded with A Study in Scarlet, where a murder took place, sort of like in a abandoned house. It seemed to be by poison because there were no injuries upon the dead man. And then later, like a couple days later, another murder occurred. This time by knife, of the first murdered man's butler or accomplice or secretary. So Sherlock Holmes was brought on the case after the first murder, and the second murder occurred while he was investigating. At the second murder scene, he found, or it was found, there were pills that turned out to be poisonous, and so Sherlock Holmes put two and two together, discovered a few more things. We learned it was of a the murderer was the cab driver who had taken the two, or had taken the first one around, and it turns out the cab driver knew them from back from America. Sherlock Holmes takes place in London, where the two killed people were abusive and corrupt, let's say, including the death of a couple of outstanding citizens, and the murderer was to be wedded to one of the murdered people back in America. So we found out who the murderer was. He was doing it for revenge against these rather gross human beings, and he died of a heart attack just a couple days after being arrested. So we kind of feel okay about how everything turned out, especially Sherlock, who solved the puzzle and everything. All right, that was the 1 minute detour of the whole story. Don't know what this book is about. Last time I read it was 10 years ago or something, so don't remember it all. All right, chapter 1, The Science of Deduction. Sherlock Holmes took his bottle from the corner of the mantelpiece and his hypodermic syringe from its neat morocco case. With his long, white, nervous fingers, he adjusted the delicate needle and rolled back his left shirt cuff. For some little time, his eyes rested thoughtfully upon the sinewy forearm and wrist, all dotted and scarred with innumerable puncture marks. Finally, he thrust the sharp point home, pressed down the tiny piston, and sank back into the velvet-lined armchair with a long sigh of satisfaction. 3 times a day for many months I had witnessed this performance, but custom had not reconciled my mind to it. On the contrary, from day to day I had become more irritable at the sight, and my conscience swelled nightly within me at the thought that I had lacked the courage to protest. Again and again I had registered a vow that I should deliver my soul upon the subject, but there was in that cool, nonchalant air of my companion, which made him the last man with whom one would care to take anything approaching to a liberty. His great powers, his masterly manner, and the experience which I had of his many extraordinary qualities all made me diffident and backward in crossing him. Yet upon that afternoon, whether it was the bune, which I'm guessing an alcohol of some sort, which I had taken with my lunch, or the additional exasperation produced by the extreme deliberation of his manner, I suddenly felt that I could hold out no longer. Which is it today? I asked. Morphine or cocaine? He raised his eyes languidly from the old black leather volume which he had opened. It is cocaine, he said, a 7% solution. Would you care to try it? No, indeed, I answered brusquely. My constitution has not got over the Afghan campaign yet. I cannot afford to throw any extra strain upon it. He smiled at my vehemence. Perhaps you are right, Watson, he said. I suppose that its influence is physically a bad one. I find it, however, so transcendently stimulating and clarifying to the mind that its secondary action is a matter of small moment. But consider, I said earnestly, count the cost. Your brain may, as you say, be roused and excited, but it is a pathological and morbid process which involves increased tissue change and may at last leave a permanent weakness. You know, too, that what a black reaction comes upon you. Surely the game is hardly worth the candle. Why should you, for a mere passing pleasure, risk the loss of those great powers with which you have been endowed? Remember that I speak not only as one comrade to another, but as a medical man to one whose constitution he is to some extent answerable. He did not seem offended. On the contrary, he put his fingertips together and leaned his elbows on the arms of his chair, like one who has a relish for a conversation. My mind, he said, rebels at stagnation. Give me problems, give me work, give me the most abstruse cryptogram or the most intricate analysis, and I am in my own proper atmosphere. I can dispense then with artificial stimulants, but I abhor the dull routine of existence. I crave for mental exaltation. That is why I have chosen my own particular profession, or rather created it, for I am the only one in the world. The only unofficial detective, I said, raising my eyebrows. The only unofficial consulting detective, he answered. I am the last and highest court of appeal and detection. When Gregson or Lestrade or Athelney Jones are out of their depths, which, by the way, is their normal state, the matter is laid before me. I examine the data as an expert and pronounce a specialist's opinion. I claim no credit in such cases. My name figures in no newspaper. The work itself, the pleasure of finding a field for my peculiar powers, is my highest reward. But you have yourself had some experience of my methods, of my work in the Jefferson Hope case. That was the previous book. Jefferson Hope was the name of the American who killed the two people in London. Yes, indeed, said I cordially. I was never so struck by anything in my life. I even embodied it in a small brochure with the somewhat fantastic title of A Study in Scarlet. He shook his head sadly. I glanced over it, said he. Honestly, I cannot congratulate you upon it. Detection is, or ought to be, an exact science, and should be treated in the same cold and unemotional manner. You have attempted to tinge it with romanticism, which produces much the same effect as if you worked a love story or an elopement into the fifth proposition of Euclid. But the romance was there, I remonstrated. I could not tamper with the facts. Some facts should be suppressed, or at least just the sense of proportion should be observed in treating them. The only point in the case which deserved mention was the curious analytical reasoning from effects to causes by which I succeeded in unraveling it. I was annoyed at this criticism of a work which had been specifically designed to please him. I confess, too, that I was irritated by the egotism which seemed to demand that every line of my pamphlet should be devoted to his own special doings. More than once during the years that I had lived with him in Baker Street, I had observed that a small vanity underlay my companion's quiet and didactic manner. I made no remark, however, but sat nursing my wounded leg. I had a Giselle bullet through it some time before, and though it did not prevent me from walking, it ached wearily at every change of the weather. The narrator, Dr. John Watson, was an army doctor stationed in Afghanistan during the 1800s. All this takes place in the 1800s, and he was removed from the front line because he was shot. My practice has extended recently to the continent, said Holmes after a while, filling up his old briar root pipe. I was consulted last week by Francois Villard, who, as you probably know, has come rather to the front lately in the French detective scene, or service. He has all the Celtic power of quick intuition, but he is deficient in the wide range of exact knowledge which is essential to the higher developments of his art. The case was concerned with a will, and possessed some measures of interest. I was able to refer him to two parallel cases, the one at Riga at 1857 and the other at St. Louis at 1871, which have suggested to him the true solution. Here's a letter which I had this morning acknowledging my assistance. I'm going to copy this guy's name. I doubt it'll matter, but yeah. He tossed over, as he spoke, a crumpled sheet of foreign notepaper. I glanced my eyes down it, catching a profusion of notes of admiration, with stray magnifiques, coup de maîtres, and tour de force, all testifying to the ardent admiration of the Frenchman. He speaks as a pupil to his master, said I. He rates my assistants too highly, said Sherlock Holmes lightly. He has considerable gifts himself. He possesses two of the three qualities necessary for the ideal detective. He has the power of observation and that of deduction. He is only wanting in knowledge, and that may come in time. He is now translating my small works to French. Your works? Oh, didn't you know? He cried, laughing. Yes, I have been guilty of several monographs. They are all upon technical subjects. Here, for example, is one upon the distinction between the ashes of various tobaccos. In it I enumerate 140 forms of cigar, cigarette, and pipe tobacco, with colored plates illustrating the difference in the ash. It is a point which is continually turning up in criminal trials, and which is sometimes of supreme importance as a clue. If you can say definitely, for example, that some murder has been done by a man who was smoking an Indian lanka, it obviously narrows your field of search. To the trained eye, there is as much difference between the black ash. Oh God, the stupid cigar name just keeps coming up. The black ash of a trichinopoly and the white fluff of a bird's eye, as there is between a cabbage and a potato. You have an extraordinary genius for minutiae, I remarked. I appreciate their importance. Here is my monograph upon the tracing of footsteps, with some remarks upon the uses of plaster of Paris as a preserver of impresses. Here, too, is a curious little work upon the influence of a trade upon the form of the hand, with lithotypes of the hands of slaters, sailors, cork cutters, compositors, weavers, and diamond polishers. That is a matter of great practical interest to the scientific detective, especially in cases of unclaimed bodies, or in discovering the antecedents of criminals. But I worry you with my hobby. Not at all, I answered earnestly. It is of the greatest interest to me, especially since I have had the opportunity of observing your practical application of it. But you spoke just now of observation and deduction. Surely the one to some extent implies the other. Why, hardly, he answered, leaning back luxuriously in his armchair and sending up thick blue wreaths from his pipe. For example, observation shows me that you have been to the Wingmore Street post office this morning, but deduction lets me know that when you were there you dispatched a telegram. Right, said I, right on both points, but I confess that I don't see how you arrived at it. It was a sudden impulse upon my part, and I have mentioned it to no one. It is simplicity itself, he remarked, chuckling at my surprise. So absurdly simple that an explanation is superfluous, and yet it may serve to define the limits of observation and of deduction. Observation tells me that you have a little reddish mold adhering to your instep. Just opposite the Seymour Street office, they have taken up the pavement and thrown up some earth which lies in such a way that it is difficult to avoid treading it in entering. The earth is of this peculiar reddish tint, which is found, as far as I know, nowhere else in the neighborhood. So much is observation. The rest is deduction. How, then, did you deduce the telegram? Why, of course, I knew that you had not written a letter, since I sat opposite to you all morning. I see also in your open desk that you have a sheet of stamps and a thick bundle of postcards. What could you go into the post office for, then, but to send a wire? Eliminate all other factors, and the one that remains must be the truth. In this case, it certainly is so, I replied after a little thought. The thing, however, is, as you say, of the simplest. Would you think me impertinent if I were to put your theories to a more severe test? On the contrary, he answered, it would prevent me from taking a second dose of cocaine. I should be delayed to look into any problem which you might submit to me. I have heard you say that it is difficult for a man to have any object in daily use without leaving the impress of his individuality upon it in such a way that a trained observer might read it. Now, I have here a watch which has recently come into my possession. Would you have the kindness to let me have an opinion upon the character or habits of the late owner. I handed him over the watch with some slight feeling of amusement in my heart, for the test was, as I thought, an impossible one, and I intended it as a lesson against the somewhat dogmatic tone which he occasionally assumed. He balanced the watch in his hand, gazed hard at the dial, opened the back, and examined the works, first with his naked eyes and then with a powerful convex lens. I could hardly keep from smiling at his crestfallen face when he finally snapped the case to and handed it back. There are hardly any data, he remarked. The watch has been recently cleaned, which robs me of my most suggestive facts. You're right, I answered. It was cleaned before being sent to me. In my heart, I accused my companion of putting forward a most lame and impotent excuse to cover his failure. What data could he expect from an unclean watch? Though unsatisfactory, my research has not been entirely barren, he observed, staring up at the ceiling with dreamy, lackluster eyes. Subject to your correction, I should judge that the watch belonged to either your elder brother, who inherited it from your father. The watch belonged to your elder brother. Okay. That you gather, no doubt, from the HW upon the back. Quite so. The W suggests your own name. The date of the watch is nearly 50 years back, and the initials are as old as the watch, so it was made for the last generation. Jewelry usually descends to the eldest son, and he is most likely to have the same name as the father. Your father has, if I remember right, been dead for many years. It has therefore been in the hands of your eldest brother. Right, so far, I said. Anything else? He was a man of untidy habits, very untidy and careless. He was left with good prospects, but he threw away his chances, lived for some time in poverty with occasional short intervals of prosperity, and finally, taking to drink, he died. That is all I can gather. I sprang from my chair and limped impatiently about the room with considerable bitterness in my heart. This is unworthy of you, Holmes, I said. I could not have believed that you would have descended to this. You have made inquiries into the history of my unhappy brother, and now you pretend to deduce this knowledge in some fanciful way. You cannot expect me to believe that you have read all this from his old watch. It is unkind, and, to speak plainly, has a touch of charlatanism in it. My dear doctor, said he kindly, pray accept my apologies. Viewing the matter as an abstract problem, I had forgotten how personal and painful a thing it might be to you. I assure you, however, that I never even knew that you had a brother until you handed me the watch. Then how in the name of all that is wonderful did you get these facts? They are absolutely correct in every particular. Ah, that is good luck. I could only say what was the balance of probability. I did not at all expect to be so accurate. But it was not mere guesswork? No, I never guess. It is a shocking habit, destructive to the logical faculty. What seems strange to you is only so because you do not follow my train of thought or observe the small facts upon which large inferences may depend. For example, I began by stating that your brother was careless. When you observed the lower part of that watch case, you did notice that it is not only dinted in 2 places, but it is cut and marked all over from the habit of keeping other hard objects, such as coins or keys, in the same pocket. Surely it is no great feat to assume that a man who treats a 50-guinea watch so cavalierly must be a careless man. Neither is it very far-fetched inference that a man who inherits one article of such value is pretty well provided for in other respects. I nodded to show that I followed his reasoning. It is very customary for pawnbrokers in England, when they take a watch, to scratch the number of the ticket with a pinpoint upon the inside of the case. It is more handy than a label, as there is no risk of the number being lost or transposed. There are no less than 4 such numbers visible to my lens on the inside of this case. Inference that your brother was often at low water. Secondary inference that he had occasional bursts of prosperity, or he could not have redeemed the pledge. Finally, I ask you to look at the inner plate, which contains the keyhole. Look at the thousands of scratches all around the hole, marks where the key had slipped. What sober man's keys could have scored these grooves? but you will never see a drunkard's watch without them. He winds it at night, and he leaves those traces on his unsteady hand, of his unsteady hand. Where is the mystery in all this? It is as clear as daylight, I answered. I regret the injustice which I did you. I should have had more faith in your marvelous faculty. May I ask whether you have any professional inquiry on foot at present? On foot at present? None, hence the cocaine. I cannot live without brain work. What else is there to live for? Stand at the window here. Was ever such a dreary, dismal, unprofitable world? See how the yellow fog swirls down the streets and drifts across the dun-colored houses. What could be more hopelessly prosaic and material? What is the use of having powers, doctor, when one has no field upon which to exert them? Crime is commonplace. Existence is commonplace, and no qualities save those which are commonplace have any function upon earth. I had opened my mouth to reply to this tirade, when with a crisp knock our landlady entered, bearing a card upon the brass salver. A young lady for you, sir, she said, addressing my companion. Miss Mary Mortson, he read. I have no recollection of the name. Ask the young lady to step up, Mrs. Hudson. Don't go, doctor. I should prefer that you remain. All right, so I'm going to add this to our character list. And I hope that this isn't a decoy. And then I'll update the stream title, and then we'll get going on chapter 2. Okay. All right, I guess we've lost our one viewer. Well, I hope you had fun, whoever you were. All right, chapter 2, the statement of the case. Miss Mordston entered the room with a firm step and an outward composure of manner. She was a blonde young lady, small, dainty, well-gloved, and dressed in the most perfect taste. There was, however, a plainness and simplicity about her costume which bore with it a suggestion of limited means. The dress was a somber grayish beige, untrimmed and unbraided, and she wore a small turban of the same dull hue, relieved only by a suspicion of white feather in the side. Her face had neither regularity of feature nor beauty of complexion, but her expression was sweet and amiable, and her large blue eyes were singularly spiritual and sympathetic. In an experience of women which extends over many nations and 3 separate continents, I have never looked upon a face which gave a clear promise of a refined and sensitive nature. I could not but observe that as she took the seat which Sherlock Holmes placed for her, her lips trembled, her hand quivered, and she showed every sign of intense inward agitation. I have come to you, Mr. Holmes, she said, because you once enabled my employer, Miss Cecil Forrester, to unravel a little domestic complication. She was much impressed by your kindness and skill. Mrs. Cecil Forrester, he repeated thoughtfully. I believe that I was of some slight service to her. The case, however, as I remember it, was a very simple one. She did not think so, but at least you cannot say the same of mine. I can hardly imagine anything more strange, more utterly inexplicable than the situation in which I find myself. Holmes rubbed his hands, and his eyes glistened. He leaned forward in his chair with an expression of extraordinary concentration upon his clear-cut, hawk-like features. State your case, said he, in a brisk business tone. I felt that my position was an embarrassing one. You will, I am sure, excuse me, I said. Oh, I felt that my position was an embarrassing one. You will, I'm sure, excuse me, I said, rising from the chair. To my surprise, the young lady held up her gloved hand to detain me. If your friend, she said, would be good enough to stop, he might be of inestimable service to me. I relapsed into my chair. Briefly, she continued, the facts are these. My father was an officer in an Indian regiment who sent me home when I was quite a child. My mother was dead, and I had no relative in England. I was placed, however, in a comfortable boarding establishment in Edinburgh, and there I remained until I was 17 years of age. Edinburgh? Edinburgh? Edinburgh. I'm going to say Edinburgh. In the year 1878, my father, who was senior captain of his regiment, obtained 12 months' leave and came home. He telegraphed to me from London that he had arrived all safe and directed me to come down at once, giving the Langham Hotel as his address. His message, as I remember, was full of kindness and love. On reaching London, I drove to the Langham and was informed that Captain Mordston was staying there, but that he had gone out the night before and had not yet returned. I waited all day without the news of him. That night, on the advice of the manager of the hotel, I communicated with the police, and next morning we advertised it in all the papers. Our inquiries led to no result, and from that day to this, no word has ever been heard of my unfortunate father. He came home with his heart full of hope to find some peace, some comfort, and instead, she put her hand to her throat, and a choking sob cut short the sentence. The date, asked Holmes, opening his notebook. He disappeared upon the 3rd of December, 1878, nearly 10 years ago. His luggage remained at the hotel. There was nothing in it to suggest a clue. Some clothes, some books, and a considerable number of curiosities from the Andaman Islands. He has been one of the officers in charge of the convict guard there. Had he any friends in town? Only one that we know of, Major Sholto of his own regiment, the 34th Bombay Infantry. The major had retired some little time before and lived in Upper Norwood. We communicated with him, of course, but he did not even know that his brother officer was in England. Okay, a singular case, remarked Holmes. I have not yet described to you the most singular part. About 6 years ago, to be exact, upon the 4th of May, 1882, an advertisement appeared in the Times asking for the address of Miss Mary Mortson and stating that it would be to her advantage to come forward. There was no name or address appended. I had at the time just entered the family of Mrs. Cecil Forster in the capacity of governess. By her advice, I published my address in the advertisement column. The same day there arrived, through the post, a small cardboard box addressed to me, which I found to contain a very large and lustrous pearl. No word of writing was enclosed. Since then, every year upon the same date, there has always appeared a similar box containing a similar pearl, without any clue as to the sender. They have been pronounced by an expert to be of a rare variety and of considerable value. You can see for yourselves that they are quite handsome. She opened a flat box as she spoke and showed me 6 of the finest pearls that I had ever seen. Your statement is most interesting, said Sherlock Holmes. Has anything else occurred to you? Yes, and no later than today. That is why I have come to you. This morning I received this letter, which you will perhaps read for yourself. Thank you, said Holmes. The envelope too, please. Postmark London, SW, South Wales, maybe? Date, July 7th. Man's thumb mark on corner, probably postman. Best quality paper. Envelopes at 6 pence a packet. Particular man in his stationery. No address. Be at the 3rd pillar from the left, outside the Lyceum Theatre tonight at 7 o'clock. If you are distrustful, bring 2 friends. You are a wronged woman and shall have justice. Do not bring police. If you do, all will be in vain. Your unknown friend. Well, really, this is a very pretty little mystery. What do you intend to do, Miss Mordston? That is exactly what I want to ask you. Then we shall most certainly go, you and I. And, yes, why, Dr. Watson is the very man. Your correspondent says 2 friends. He and I have worked together before. But would he come, she asked, with something appealing in her voice and expression. I should be proud and happy, said I, fervently, if I can be of any service. You are both very kind, she answered. I have led a retired life, and have no friends whom I could appeal to. If I am here at 6, it will do, I suppose. You must not be later, said Holmes. There is one other point, however. Is this handwriting the same as that upon the pearl box addresses? Is this handwriting the same as that upon the pearl box addresses? I have them here, she answered, producing half a dozen pieces of paper. You are certainly a model client. You have the correct intuition. Let us see now. He spread out the papers upon the table and gave little darting glances from one to the other. They are disguised hands, except the letter, he said presently, but there can be no question as to the authorship. See how the irrepressible Greek E will break out, and see how the twirl of the final S? They are undoubtedly by the same person. I should not like to suggest false hopes, Miss Mordston, but is there any resemblance between this hand and that of your father? Nothing could be more unlike. I expected to hear you say so. We shall look out for you, then, at 6. Pray allow me to keep the papers. I may look into the matter before then. It is only 3:30. Au revoir, then. Au revoir, said our visitor, and, with a bright, kindly glance from one to the other of us, she replaced her pearl box in the inner bosom and hurried away. Standing at the window, I watched her walking briskly down the street until the gray turban and white feather were but a speck in the somber crowd. What a very attractive woman, I exclaimed, turning to my companion. He had lit his pipe again, and was leaning back with drooping eyelids. Is she? He said languidly. I did not observe. You really are an automaton, a calculating machine, I cried. There is something positively inhuman in you at times. He smiled gently. It is of the first importance, he said, not to allow your judgment to be biased by personal qualities. A client is to me a mere unit, a factor in a problem. The emotional qualities are antagonistic to clear reasoning. I assure you that the most winning woman I ever knew was hanged for poisoning 3 little children for their insurance money, and the most repellent man of my acquaintance is a philanthropist who has spent nearly $250,000 upon the London poor. In this case, however, I never make exceptions. An exception disproves the rule. Have you ever had occasion to study character and handwriting? What do you make of this fellow's scribble? It is legible and regular, I answered, a man of business habits and some force of character. Holmes shook his head. Look at his long letters, he said. They hardly rise above the common herd. That D might be an A, and that L an E. In cursive, L and E are very similar. Men of character always differentiate their long letters, however illegibly they may write. There's vacillation in his K's and self-esteem in his capitals. I'm going out now. I have some few references to make. Let me recommend this book, one of the most remarkable ever penned. It is Winwood Reade's Martyrdom of Man. I shall be back in an hour. I sat in the window with the volume in my hand, but my thoughts were far from the daring speculations of the writer. My mind ran upon our late visitor, her smiles, the deep rich tones of her voice, the strange mystery which overhung her life. If she were 17 at the time of her father's disappearance, she might be 27 now, a sweet age when youth has lost its self-consciousness and became a little sobered by experience. So I sat and mused until such dangerous thoughts came into my head that I hurried away to my desk and plunged furiously into the latest treatise upon pathology. What was I, an army surgeon with a weak leg and a weaker banking account, that I should dare to think of such things? She was a unit, a factor, nothing more. If my future were black, it was better surely to face it like a man than to attempt to brighten it by mere will-o'-the-wisps of the imagination. Okay, I'm going to update Mary Mortson's bio in the character list on the side. And then I'm going to edit the stream title. Great. Oh, I've lost my viewer again. Sorry. It was 5:30. It was 5:30 before Holmes returned. He was bright, eager, and in excellent spirits, a mood which in his case alternated with fits of the blackest depression. "There is no great mystery in this matter," he said, taking the cup of tea which I had poured out for him. "The facts appear to admit of only one explanation." "What? You have solved it already?" "Well, that would be too much to say. I have discovered a suggestive fact, that is all. It is, however, very suggestive. The details are still to be added. I have just found, on consulting the back files of the Times, that Major Sholto, of Upper Norwood, late of the 34th Bombay Infantry, died upon 28th of April, 1882. I may be very obtuse, Holmes, but I fail to see what that suggests." Hello. Welcome. We are reading Sherlock Holmes' second book, and we just discovered, we were just introduced to Mary Mortson, who has received some gifts over the last few years and just recently was told to meet someone tonight. And so she went to Holmes and Watson as sort of guides or chauffeurs to make sure that she isn't going to be disappeared like her father, I guess. No, you surprise me. Look at it in this way, then. Captain Mortson disappears. The only person in London whom he could have visited is Major Sholto. Major Sholto denies having heard that he was in London. 4 years later, Sholto dies. Within a week of his death, Captain Mortson's daughter receives a valuable present, which was repeated from year to year, and now culminates in a letter which describes her as a wronged woman. What wrong can it refer to except this deprivation of her father? And why should the presents begin immediately after Sholto's death, unless it is that Sholto's heir knows something of the mystery and desires to make compensation? Have you any alternative theory which meets the facts? But what a strange compensation. And how strangely made. Why, too, should he write a letter now rather than 6 years ago? Again, the letter speaks of giving her justice. What justice can she have? It is too much to suppose that her father is still alive. There is no other injustice in her case that you know of. There are certainly difficulties, said Sherlock Holmes pensively. But our expedition of tonight will solve them all. Ah, here is a four-wheeler, and Miss Mortson is inside. Are you all ready? and we had better go down. It is a little past the hour. I picked up my hat and my heaviest stick, but I observed that Holmes took his revolver from his drawer and slipped it into his pocket. It was clear that he thought that our night's work might be a serious one. Miss Mortson was muffled in a dark cloak, and her sensitive face was composed but pale. She must have been more than woman if she did not feel some uneasiness at the strange enterprise upon which we were embarking. Yet her self-control was perfect, and she readily answered the few additional questions which Sherlock Holmes put to her. Major Sholto was a very particular friend of Papa's, she said. His letters were full of allusions to the Major. He and Papa were in command of the troops at the Andaman Islands, so they were thrown a great deal together. By the way, a curious paper was found in Papa's desk which no one could understand. I don't suppose that it is of the slightest importance, but I thought you might care to see it, so I brought it with me. Here it is. Holmes unfolded the paper carefully and smoothed it out upon his knee. He then very methodically examined it all over with his double lens. It is paper of native Indian manufacture, he remarked. It has at some point been pinned to a board. The diagram upon it appears to be a plan of part of a large building with numerous halls, corridors, and passages. At one point is a small cross done in red ink, and above it is 337 from left in fading pencil writing. In the left-hand corner is a curious hieroglyphic like 4 crosses in a line with their arms touching. Beside it is written in very rough and coarse characters the sign of the 4, Jonathan Small, Mahomet Singh, Abdullah Khan, Dost Akbar. No, I confess that I do not see how this bears upon the matter, yet it is evidently a document of importance. It has been kept carefully in a pocketbook, for the one side is as clean as the other. It was in his pocketbook that we found it. Preserve it carefully, then, Miss Mortson, for it may prove to be of use to us. I begin to suspect that this matter may turn out to be much deeper and more subtle than I at first supposed. I must reconsider my ideas. He leaned back in the cab, and I could see by his drawn brow and his vacant eye that he was thinking intently. Miss Mortson and I chatted in an undertone about our present expedition and its possible outcome, but our companion maintained his impenetrable reserve until the end of the journey. Hello, Evan. Turns out I read the wrong book on Saturday, or at least the third book rather than the second book. So I've gone back. We started the second book, The Sign of 4. Yeah. So we're actually reading it in order now. Yeah, exactly. So Miss Mortson showed up, said, hey, my father 10 years ago disappeared from London. He was like at war or something like that. And he's like, I'm home, daughter. I'm going to come see you. I'm at this hotel. But when she got to the hotel, he was missing. And then a few years later, she started receiving gifts from an unknown person, which apparently is also at the same time as like the father's friend slash co-captain. I don't know the different military ranks, but it's like kind of the same level of person in the military died. She started receiving these like very nice gifts, and she came to Sherlock Holmes today because she received a letter to go to this random place, and you've been wronged and I want to make it right, but if you don't trust me, bring 2 friends. So she went to Sherlock Holmes, and what do you know, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson are 2 friends. So that's where they're on their way to right now. Okay. It was a September evening and not yet 7 o'clock. Oh, I'll update the character list to include General Sholto and the father. It was a September evening, and not yet 7 o'clock, but the day had been a dreary one, and a dense drizzling fog lay low upon the great city. Mud-colored clouds drooped sadly over the muddy streets. Down the Strand the lamps were but misty splotches of diffused light which threw a feeble circular glimmer upon the slimy pavement. The yellow glare from the shop windows streamed out into the steamy, vaporous air and threw a murky, shifting radiance across the crowded thoroughfare. There was, to my mind, something eerie and ghost-like in the endless procession of faces which flitted across these narrow bars of light. Sad faces and glad, haggard and merry. Like all humankind, they flitted from the gloom into the light, and so back into gloom once more. I am not subject to impressions, but the dull, heavy evening, with the strange business upon which we were engaged, combined to make me nervous and depressed. I could see from Miss Mortson's manner that she was suffering from the same feeling. Holmes alone could rise superior to petty influences. He held his open notebook upon his knee, and from time to time he jotted down figures and memoranda in the light of his pocket lantern. At the Lyceum Theatre, which is where they're meeting the writer, at the Lyceum Theatre, the crowds were already thick at the side entrances. In front, a continuous stream of hansoms and four-wheelers were rattling up, discharging their cargoes of shirt-fronted men and beshawled, bediamonded women. We had hardly reached the third pillar, which was our rendezvous, before a small, dark, brisk man in the dress of a coachman accosted us. "Are you the parties who come with Miss Mortson?" he asked. "I am Miss Mortson, and these two gentlemen are my friends," said she. He bent a pair of wonderfully penetrating and questioning eyes upon us. "You excuse me, miss," he said with a certain dogged manner, "but I was to ask you to give me your word that neither of your companions is a police officer." "I give you my word on that," she answered. He gave a shrill whistle, on which a street Arab led across a four-wheeler and opened the door. The man who had addressed us mounted to the box while we took our places inside. We had hardly done so before the driver whipped up his horse, and we plunged away at a furious pace through the foggy streets. The situation was a curious one. We were driving to an unknown place on an unknown errand, yet our invitation was either a complete hoax, which was an inconceivable hypothesis, or else we would have good reason to think that important issues might hang upon our journey. Miss Mortson's demeanor was as resolute and collected as ever. I endeavored to cheer and amuse her by reminiscences of my adventures in Afghanistan, but, to tell the truth, I was myself so excited at our situation and so curious as to our destination that my stories were slightly involved. To this day, she declares that I told her one moving anecdote as to how a musket looked into my tent at the dead of night, and how I fired a double-barreled tiger cub at it. At first, I had some idea as to the direction in which we were driving, but soon, what with our pace, the fog, and my limited knowledge of London, I lost my bearings, and knew nothing, save that we seemed to be going a very long way. Sherlock Holmes was never at fault, however, and he muttered the names as the cab rattled through squares and in and out by tortuous by-streets. Sorry. "Rochester Row," he said. Now Vincent Square. Now we come on to the Vex Hall Bridge Road. We are making for the Surrey side, apparently. Yes, I thought so. Now we are on the bridge. You can catch glimpses of the river. We did indeed get a fleeting view of a stretch of the Thames, with the lamps shining upon the broad, silent water. But our cab dashed on, and was soon involved in a labyrinth of streets upon the other side. Wordsworth Road, said my companion. Priory Road, Lark Hall Lane, Stockwell Place, Robert Street, Cold Harbor Lane. Our quest does not appear to take us to very fashionable regions. We had indeed reached a questionable and forbidding neighborhood. Long lines of dull brick houses were only relieved by the coarse glare and dowdy brilliancy of public houses at the corner. Then came rows of two-storied villas, each with a fronting of miniature garden, and then again interminable lines of new staring brick buildings, the monster tentacles which the giant city was throwing out into the country. Okay. At last the cab drew up at the third house in a new terrace. None of the other houses were inhabited, and that at which we stopped was as dark as its neighbors, save for a single glimmer in the kitchen window. On our knocking, however, the door was instantly thrown open by a Hindu servant clad in a yellow turban, white loose-fitting clothes, and yellow sash. There was something strangely incongruous in this ornamental figure framed in the commonplace doorway of a third-rate suburban dwelling house. The Sahib awaits you, said he, and even as he spoke, there came a high piping voice from some inner room. Show them in to me. Oh my God. Khitmatigar, it cried. Show them straight into me. All right. It's been 57 minutes, so I'm going to see how much... All right, I'll read for like 5 more minutes. I won't waste time editing the stream title and stuff. The story of the bald-headed man. We followed the Indian down a sordid and common passage, ill-lit and worse furnished, until he came to a door upon the right, which he threw open. A blaze of yellow light streamed out upon us, and in the center of the glare there stood a small man with a very high head, a bristle of red hair all round the fringe of it, and a bald, shining scalp, which shot out from among it like a mountain peak from fir trees. Okay. He writhed his hands together as he stood, and his features were in a perpetual jerk, now smiling, now scowling, but never in an instant in repose. Nature had given him a pendulous lip, and a too visible line of yellow and irregular teeth, which he strove feebly to conceal by constantly passing his hand over the lower part of his face. In spite of his obtrusive baldness, he gave the impression of youth. In point of fact, he had just turned his 30th year. Your servant, Miss Mortson, he kept repeating in a thin, high voice. Your servant, gentlemen. Pray step into my little sanctum. A small place, miss, but furnished to my own liking. An oasis of art in the howling desert of South London. We were all astonished by the appearance of the apartment into which he invited us. In that sorry house, it looked as out of place as a diamond of the first water in a setting of brass. The richest and glossiest of curtains and tapestries draped the walls, looped back here and there to expose some richly mounted painting or oriental vase. The carpet was of amber and black, so soft and so thick that the foot sank pleasantly into it, as into a bed of moss. 2 great tiger skins thrown athwart it increased the suggestion of Eastern luxury, as did a huge hookah which stood upon a mat in the corner. A lamp in an almost invisible golden wire. Oh, a lamp in the fashion... I skipped some words. A lamp in the fashion of a silver dove was hung from an almost invisible wire in the center of the room. As it burned, it filled the air with a subtle and aromatic odor. Mr. Thaddeus Sholto, said the little man, still jerking and smiling. That is my name. You are Miss Mortson, of course. And these gentlemen, this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson. A doctor, eh? Cried he, much excited. Have you your stethoscope? Might I ask you, would you have the kindness? I have grave doubts as to my mitral valve, if you would be so very good. The aortic I may rely upon, but I should value your opinion upon the mitral. I listened to his heart, as requested, but was unable to find anything amiss, save indeed that he was in ecstasy of fear, for he shivered from head to foot. It appears to be normal, I said. You have no cause for uneasiness. You will excuse my anxiety, Miss Mortson, he remarked airily. I am a great sufferer, and I have long had suspicions as to that valve. I am delighted to hear that they are unwarranted. Had your father, Miss Mortson, refrained from throwing a strain upon his heart, he might have been alive now. I could have struck the man across the face, so hot was I at this callous and offhand reference to so delicate a matter. Miss Mortson sat down, and her face grew white to the lips. I knew in my heart that he was dead, said she. Okay. Surprise. I can give you every information, said he, and what is more, I can do you justice, and I will, too, whatever Brother oh my God. Bartholomew, I know how to say this word, I'm just blanking, may say. I am so glad to have your friends here, not only as an escort to you, but also as witnesses to what I am about to do and say. The three of us can show a bold front to Brother Bartholomew, but let us have no outsiders, no police or officials. We can settle everything satisfactorily among ourselves without any inference. Nothing would annoy Brother Bart more than any publicity. He sat down upon a low settee and blinked at us inquiringly with his weak, watery blue eyes. For my part, said Holmes, whatever you may choose to say will go no further. I nodded to show my agreement. That is well, said he. May I offer you a glass of Chianti, Miss Mortson, or of Tokay? I keep no other wines. Shall I open a flask? No? Well, then I trust that you have no objection to tobacco smoke, to the mild balsamic odor of the eastern tobacco. I am a little nervous, and I find my hookah an invaluable sedative. He applied a taper to the great bowl, and the smoke bubbled merrily through the rose water. We sat all three in a semicircle, with our heads advanced and our chins upon our hands, while the strange, jerky little fellow, with his high shining head, puffed uneasily in the center. Okay, I think this is going to be like a description of what's going to be happening next. So I'm going to end my reading there. But yeah. It's interesting that he says his name is Sholto, because that is the name of the man who Holmes found an obituary for. So maybe it's a different Sholto. Yeah. Is this time no longer good for you, Evan, or were you just delayed today? We had another viewer almost right at the beginning who sent a little party popper icon. Oh, no worries. Yeah, but then it looked like that the person left almost immediately after sending the little icon, the little emoji. So we had a viewer for almost the whole time, so it's all good. Yeah. There will be a VOD. I haven't checked recently, but I assume that they're all there. Yeah. Hope you're doing well. Um, we haven't really played anything recently, right? We haven't like played the bunny game where we name all the bunnies Travis. We haven't um, done Cooking Mama or whatever it's called. Overcooked. So hopefully maybe we can find a way to play the basic land game online. Can't be too difficult to program. Yeah. I might get one of the other people to actually hang out. So, yeah, something to think about. But yeah, I have a workout I need to get ready for. But I will talk to you later / tomorrow. Down with Big Brother.